within a minute of takeoff from the Ahmedabad airport at 1:38 this afternoon. The plane was carrying 169 Indians, 53 British nationals, 7 Portuguese and 1 Canadian passenger. It was bound for London Gatwick. Hundreds have been declared dead, including the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, who was one of the passengers who was on board that ill-fated flight. The aircraft involved was the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. It is the very first time that the Dreamliner flight is crashing in such a fashion. The pilots have believed to have lost both engines, and it plunged very quickly within seconds after taking off. In fact, that video clip that we're playing shows that the entire sequence of events happened within a minute after takeoff of this ill-fated flight AI 171. The London-bound flight took off from Ahmedabad. It was exactly at 1:39 in the afternoon today, but within a minute it crashed about 5 kilometers or so away from the BJ Medical College and Civil Hospital. It crashed into a building which is believed to be a residential compound, hostel facility for undergraduate medical students. This was lunchtime, it was peak hour, and there were a lot of undergraduate medical students who were there in that building having their lunch or coming to the mess or the canteen to have their lunch. So a large number of the people who were in that building could have also died. We're given to understand about 30 people have been moved from this building who were on the ground in this building. They've been taken to hospital. We don't know the number of fatalities there. But as far as the people who were on board this flight is concerned, other than one survivor, Ramesh Vishwash Kumar, who was sitting on seat number 11A, closest to the emergency exit, and once the plane crashed, he jumped out through the emergency exit. He's the lone survivor out of 242 people who were on board this flight AI 171 Ahmedabad to London. He, of course, those are the pictures from earlier this afternoon, jumped off the aircraft, limped away, and then an ambulance took him to hospital. He said that he was lucky to survive. He jumped off the aircraft. He saw dead bodies and mangled remains around him, wreckage of the plane around him. He was very scared, he said, and then he ran away, and then somebody took him in an ambulance to hospital. He is the lone survivor. What a miracle story this is for him and his family members. I believe he was also traveling with some of his family members back from Ahmedabad. He was going back to London. He's a British citizen. He was in India for a few days to celebrate some functions back home, but he was on his way back to London, and he managed to survive. But he is the sole survivor that we know of. All the other passengers, I'm afraid, are dead in this flight. So what exactly transpired? Because this flight, clearly from the images you can see, failed to achieve critical liftoff. In fact, it reached about 600 feet in the air, and then immediately after that started descending, almost gliding down for the crash that eventually happened. So what exactly transpired? The initial data from flight Air India 171 shows that the aircraft reached a maximum barometric altitude of 625 feet. That's the maximum that it reached. The airport altitude is about 200 feet. So right after it reached 625 feet, immediately after that, there was a mayday call that was made by the pilot to the air traffic control, but there was no communication that was established between the air traffic control and the pilot following that call. Post that call, which happened within 30 seconds of takeoff, the plane began to descend within vertical speed of 475 feet per minute. Then it crashed just outside the perimeter of the airport. It crashed into a hostel cum residential facility that was meant for undergraduate medical students, and a large number of students who had gathered there during the peak lunch hour time. They, I'm afraid, could have also fallen victim to this fatal air crash. Now, in the various videos that have been accessed of this horrific crash, the very moment of the crash was caught in one of these videos. You can see how the plane, it takes off. It travels barely a few kilometers. We're given to understand about 5 odd kilometers. And right after that, it crashes into the building below. There's been massive damage on the ground as well in this residential complex, in this hostel complex. But in the videos of the aftermath, the extent of the damage is also clearly visible. There's a huge plume of smoke and fire and gas. The debris lay scattered all around, even as firefighters and emergency responders rushed to the site. One of the parts of the ill-fated plane, in fact, landed on top of a hostel mess. It was a medical residential facility meant for undergraduate medical students in Ahmedabad. It resulted in considerable damage and loss of lives. The visuals from inside the affected complex also show massive damage to the structure of the building itself. In fact, a large part of that building caved in because of the sheer impact of the crash. In yet another video, you can see the aftermath of the crash. You can see, a huge plume of smoke there, a lot of fire, a lot of thick black smoke around that area just rising into the sky. Remember, this was a flight that was meant to be about 8 to 9 hours between Ahmedabad and London Gatwick. So it had a tank full of aviation fuel, about 60,000 litres plus of aviation fuel. So all of that would have come down in this crash. The fire that emanated gutted multiple buildings, but the main point of impact was this residential hostel complex right on the outskirts of the airport. And of course, the surrounding areas were also badly hit. But then the question that everybody is asking is, what led to this crash? The 787 Dreamliner is one of the safest aircraft in the world. It's been in service for close to 15 years now, and it has not seen even one major accident. This is the first of its kind accident involving a 787 Dreamliner. What could have possibly led to it? This 787 Dreamliner, this particular aircraft, was delivered to Air India in January of 2014. This is the first recorded crash of a Boeing 787 anywhere in the world, and this is what has raised eyebrows. There was a Guardian report back in 2024 where Guardian was interviewing a whistleblower who used to work with Boeing. He's been named as Sam Salehpour, who's an engineer with Boeing. He worked with Boeing for over a decade. He urged Boeing in that interview to ground every single 787 Dreamliner worldwide. He warned that the 787s were at a risk of premature failure. The whistleblower also alleged that Boeing took shortcuts to reduce the production bottlenecks while making the 787. He also raised issues about the production of the 777. He also alleged that he faced retaliation from the company, including threats and exclusion from meetings after raising concerns over these issues, including a gap between the parts of the fuselage and the remainder of the body of the 787. Now, while this is one isolated report, this came out in 2024. Boeing didn't necessarily take any action, at least certainly did not ground the 787 fleet. After this interview, after this Guardian report came out, it did raise questions about the safety of passengers. Many questions are being asked in the aftermath of this crash, many for which answers will be sought for, but right now these questions are unanswered. Number one, was there any kind of technical issue that was detected before this flight took off, either the day before the flight or moments before this flight took off? Remember, this flight also had arrived from Delhi. This was an Delhi-Ahmedabad flight first, a 2-hour flight, and then it was subsequently meant to be an Ahmedabad-London Gatwick flight. So was there any technical snag or any issue noticed in the first flight that was between Delhi and Ahmedabad? What prompted the pilot to issue an SOS or a Mayday call, and that too within a minute of takeoff? You can see just how quickly, within moments of takeoff, it reaches about 600 feet in height and then immediately starts gliding down or sliding down. Could any kind of foul play or angle of foul play be ruled out officially by Boeing, by Air India, and of course by government authorities, including the DGCA, which will do a thorough audit and a thorough check of what exactly led to this crash? The other question that's being asked, will all Boeing 787 flights, certainly Indian operators, Air India operates a lot of 787 Dreamliners, will they be grounded following this flight, this crash? Will the black box and the voice recorder instruments that are there on board all flights, will they be recovered, and will they unlock the mystery that led to this plane crash? I want to first go across to Mr. Jitendra Bhargav. He's a former executive director with Air India. Mr. Bhargav, thank you very much for joining us. This particular Air India crash will go down in history. It's the deadliest. It's the first time that a Dreamliner 787 has crashed like this. From whatever you can see in this footage, the flight taking off within a minute, it sort of starts descending. Within a minute, we're given to understand the Mayday call was made by the pilot, and then the plane crashes. What do you think could have possibly gone wrong from whatever you've seen in the available footage?
No, it's a very horrific incident. This accident has taken place. We are all very sorry about it. Having worked for Air India, I felt very dejected for the first 2 hours. Did not know how to react to the situation. But the irony has been that it's happened during daytime. You had a captain in the cockpit, commander who had 8,000 plus hours of flying experience. You had an aircraft Dreamliner which has a relatively good safety track record. Now, what can possibly go wrong? But rather than hazard a guess or speculate, I'll wait for the formal inquiry involving Boeing as the manufacturer of the aircraft Dreamliner, which is involved, airline, Air India, and India's regulatory agency, DGCA, to decode the black box, come to a conclusion and say this is what happened. Because the standard operating procedure in an airline industry is that when an accident takes place, you come to the conclusion, and if any lessons have to be learned, deficiencies, technical deficiency in an aircraft, pilot training, etc., then you try and rectify it. So let's wait for it and say get on. But except for, of course, for the moment, our heart goes out to the passengers' families and to the people on ground. You see, the tragedy has been that it happened during daytime, but what would have been a beneficial thing happening in daytime was that a pilot could have possibly steered the aircraft to a place which is barren, which had no thing. But the time available to the pilot
Yeah.
was so short.
He hardly had
After
any time.
takeoff, a few minutes getting onto an altitude of no more than 700 feet, and then hurtling down at a fixed speed. You can't even control. You can't even dump fuel.
All right.
Because if the fuel he had the chance to opportunity to dump fuel, the fire would not have engulfed the aircraft in the way it did, and the survival rate would have been much higher. And of course, we have only one case at the moment, but let's hope there are more people who survived the
I do
accident.
want to know from you, Mr. Bhargav, there have been reports that it could have been a technical error, some kind of a technical failure, and that could have led to the eventual Mayday call. And the Mayday call happened within a minute of takeoff. In fact, the entire thing happened within a minute of takeoff and then the crash itself. What could possibly be the reason for why and how so quickly the pilot made that Mayday call? Because it indicates that within moments of takeoff, he realized that something was wrong. What could it have been?
Oh, no, no, certainly not. You see, let's put it this way. If there was a technical fault and somebody had to conclude, because it is not that the Air India will ground the Dreamliner if there is a reason for it. All airlines world over operating Dreamliners will have to do it likewise if the Boeing was to issue an advisory. Clearly speaking, we can't jump to a conclusion and say it happened because of a technical fault. Whether it is technical, aircraft defect, or it is maintenance fault, one will only come after the inquiry has been concluded. Let's not jump to conclusion and say, look, the aircraft needs to be grounded, etc. It could be an aircraft war, all right, aircraft manufacturers war to say, let's put it this way. But as an airline man, I would say no, there is no need for grounding of Dreamliners at this stage.
All right, Mr. Bhargav, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Jitendra Bhargav is former executive director with Air India. I want to now open this up to our guests who are joining us. Captain Sam Thomas is a former pilot and president of the Airline Pilots Association of India. Alpa Y.N. Sharma is CEO of Chimes Aviation. Sanjay Lazar, aviation expert and CEO of Avia Labs. And Devendra Padnikar is former cabin crew with Air India. Let me start with you, Captain Sam Thomas. You know, a couple of things stand out. Obviously, within a minute after takeoff, the captain realizes that something's wrong. He issues a Mayday call. The flight barely makes past 5 kilometers, barely makes it to about 600 feet. And from these pictures, it's clear that there was some issue with the liftoff of the flight. He was not able to acquire enough momentum for liftoff. That's why it didn't go up beyond 600 feet. What do you think could have possibly gone wrong?
Good evening, Zaka. First of all, our hearts and prayers with the victims. And at this time, the usual caveat, I or anybody else would not be authoritatively able to tell you what the reasons for this particular crash has happened. However, we understand that the public at large would like to know and get some answers. And that is what we'll try and address at this time. From the visuals that are being played out, it's very difficult to hazard a guess. But within our groups, firstly, there is a somber kind of moment, and nobody is talking to anybody at this time, and it's too early to figure out exactly what has happened without the DFDR data. Having said that, it appears that this airplane is not developing power on both the engines, and that could be, though it's completely under the realms of speculation, that is what at the moment we feel it is.
But how can a flight lose power in both engines? I mean, that's like a 1 in a million chance that both engines fail and fail at the same time.
Yes, it has happened. This is the third occurrence that I can remember during my career of 30 years. If you remember the miracle at Hudson, where the airplane lost both its engines due to a bird hit, a flock of birds went into both the engines. And also, there was a 777 that landed short of London Heathrow because of fuel contamination. And this is the third time. If our conjecture is correct, then this would be the third time in the history of aviation that it is happening. So there is nothing with regard to machine that we can authoritatively say that it will not fail. And
Okay.
no matter how many redundant systems you have, there have been cases of failures, and this probably appears to be one of them.
Mr. Y.N. Sharma of Chimes Aviation, the Dreamliner, the 787, is arguably one of the safest aircraft in the world in the almost 15 years that it's been in service. And I believe this particular aircraft was drafted into Air India in 2014. So this particular aircraft itself has been in service for more than 10 years. The Dreamliner has not had a single case of an accident. So surely something awfully wrong must have happened with this particular aircraft. Does it raise suspicion that, as the captain said a moment ago, there have been only 3 instances where both engines of an aircraft have failed at the same time?
At the outset, first, let me just express my deep anguish at this unfortunate incident. Now, as my fellow panelist was saying, that the instances which have been reported on this aircraft earlier, where both engines have failed simultaneously, have been clearly attributed to the causes were identified. In one case, it was a flock of birds that flew into both the engines. At the second time, it was fuel contamination. Right now, till the time the data is analyzed, it is absolutely premature to hazard any kind of guess on what could be, the reason here. But it does look as if just after takeoff, the aircraft seems to have lost power and has just descended. And it doesn't look as if it went very far. It looks, as you said, the altitude of Ahmedabad airport is 200 feet. It seems to have recorded a total height of 600, which means that it just attained a height of 400 feet before it started descending.
Correct.
And, it could be, anything is possible. It could be a flock of birds which could have flown in and incapacitated both the engines. That could be one of the reasons. It could be override to the pilot input. That's also possible. But all these things one would know only after the data recorders are analyzed, and our investigating authorities, which is the Aircraft Investigation Bureau and the DGCA, they do a thorough inquiry and give us the answers that we seek.
Mr. Sanjay Lazar, this was the same flight. It was a Delhi, Ahmedabad, and then after that from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick. So this flight had gone 2 hours from Delhi to Ahmedabad. The crew changed in Ahmedabad. But if there was anything wrong, would it have been sort of flagged in the previous leg of this flight?
Thanks for having me, Zaka. First of all, my condolences to all the families of the crew, the pilots, the cabin crew, passengers, and of course, the students in the hostel. It's a dark day for Indian aviation and for Air India in particular. When we look at this aircraft, it's flown from Delhi to Ahmedabad, and obviously everything was fine. It's done its mandatory pre-flight checks also. Let's not forget that. There was probably an AME and a ground engineer who would have looked at the aircraft. The pilot in command or the first officer would have done his walk around and checks. So let's understand this was a perfectly fine aircraft. This aircraft is 11 and a half years in service. And one of the newer ones, like you said in your introduction, the 787 is a very reliable machine and has been, there are more than 1,200 of them flying in the world today.
Yeah.
So when we enter into discussion on this, we shouldn't get into the realm of speculation. The video you've shown is a very telling comment. It obviously means, like Captain Thomas has pointed out, either something catastrophic has happened to both engines, like bird ingestion in both engines, or just mechanical failure or engine failure in both. But what is important is the commander gave a mayday call at 13:59 or 13:39 hours, and there was also an ACAS message, I'm told, but that's not confirmed as yet. But it's very clear that he lost lift, he lost thrust, and it dropped like a stone.
What are the conditions, or what are the scenarios in which an aircraft at the time of takeoff loses lift?
Well, obviously failure of the engine, or some problem with the engine. If birds hit the engine, it would completely seize. So if a flock of vultures or any large type of birds, and Ahmedabad is notorious for a lot of this instances. So it's quite possible. But it's the key thing here is that the aircraft wasn't lifting, and then it just crashed into that hostel building. You saw part of the tail on the roof, and then the aircraft collided. Yeah? It's miraculous that we saw one survivor, and I pray to God there are more, because we need miracles like that. Looking at such a grim situation today.
Before I go to Devendra Padnakar, I think Mr. Lazar made
just one point. Both these pilots were highly experienced pilots.
Exactly.
Okay, Captain Sabharwal was 8,200 hours.
Correct.
The other pilot was 1,100 hours. So that's almost 10,000 hours of flying.
Yeah.
So let's respect that as well. They've tried to manage this. We don't know what happened. We'll get to know after the investigation.
I just want to show you this story of hope, really, the only silver lining of hope amongst the 240 plus who have died. This one gentleman, Ramesh Vishwash Kumar, and I want to go to Devendra Padnakar on this. He was sitting, I believe, on 11A, which is the seat that is closest to the emergency exit. It's the first row of economy. He was traveling with some of his family members. The manifest says, which is different from the boarding pass number. The boarding pass, it says 11A, but the manifest says he was supposed to sit in 11J, and a lady was supposed to sit in 11A. In any case, when the flight took off, he was in the window seat. He was in 11A, the first seat in the economy row. The flight crashes. He's closest to the emergency exit. He jumps out, and then he spoke to some reporters there, and he said, I couldn't see anything. It was just a huge ball of smoke and fire, and there were mangled remains all around me. I got scared. I started running, and then somebody came with an ambulance, and they put me in an ambulance and took me to hospital. A phenomenal story of walking away from the dead, almost cheating death. There were 200 plus others on that same flight, and all of them are dead, Devendra Padnakar, and this man survived. What a story. He will live to tell this tale till the rest of his life.
Yeah, it's indeed a miracle. That would be 1 in a billion that could happen, someone just escaping death like this. But I feel sorry for everyone who's lost their lives, right from the crew members to the cockpit crew to the civilians the plane crashed on, to the passengers who were flying on that aircraft. It is very shocking. Till the day when I flew, I was always dreading that something like this should never happen to anybody or the entire world. But today I'm seeing this, and I'm still in shock from the afternoon itself that something like that, and I still can't believe something like that has already happened. And I see a survivor like this who's escaped. He's truly blessed. But I don't know. I'm just short of words of not being able to express how deeply saddened I am with whatever's happened to me.
Can you also sort of understand, and from the pictures that we're seeing, within the first 30 seconds, it takes off till about 600 feet and then immediately starts dropping almost like, somebody threw a big rock from the sky. Clearly, there was no control there. What could have possibly led to this?
Like Captain Thomas said, that there could be endless possibilities that could happen, and we speculating on them is really not, to to be considered. But I feel that there is very little chance of anticipation when something like this happens, and it is just seconds where you fall and then you realize that you were amidst a crash, or you're not even there to even express that. So I wouldn't know what exactly happened, but we should wait and we should see what the governing authorities have to find out about why this crash actually happened, and we come to know more into it.
I also want to see if we can go across to my colleague Arunima. She's just landed at the Ahmedabad airport. Remember, the airport was shut for a couple of hours, in fact more than a couple of hours, from about 2 o'clock till 4 o'clock, and then after which it reopened. So if Arunima is there, we'll try and go across to her. We'll try and get her. But Captain Thomas, what are the various inquiries that will now get ordered? Obviously, Boeing will have its own inquiry. I would imagine the DGCA will have that as well. And what would it take to understand what happened on this flight and what led to this crash?
Yeah, Zaka, the most important thing is the investigation now. And Air Accident Investigation Board, that's the AAIB of India, would be involved along with DGCA. And they have a mandate of about 30 days within which they have to give a preliminary report. And the DFDR, CVR, ACARs, all will be analyzed threadbare. And the OEMs, the engine manufacturers, the airframe Boeing, and anybody even remotely connected with the avionics would be a part of this investigation. What we in India sometimes find lacking is the transparency that happens. And that is why we from Alpine India want to reach out to the people and say that we would also like to be a part of this investigation, as we are, quite a few of us are certified investigators, and so that it's not a blame game that happens. A part of investigation is to find out the exact cause and to mitigate that risk so that never in future this particular incident happens. Now, we in India sadly lack qualified investigators, and that could be one of the reasons why a lot of the FAA and NTSB investigators would be called in. And we want the exact report of as it happened with the exact causes to come out so that the traveling public is made aware of what exactly transpired on this particular flight.
Yeah, Sanjay Azhar, before we go to Arunima, a quick word. The previous major accidents, air accidents that we've seen here in India, one was, I think, the Kozhikode runway crash. Again, the flight, I believe, overran the runway. Similarly, about more than 10 years ago, there was the Mangalore crash, which was a tabletop runway. Again, it sort of fell off that tabletop runway and into the jungles. But we haven't seen anything of this kind, where a flight is taking off, and within a minute or so after takeoff, it just glides down, like you said, drops dead like a rock, and crashes into the ground.
It's in fact the first wide-body aircraft to crash in 40 years in India. The last one we had was 1978, Emperor Ashoka, then the Emperor Kanishka, which was bombed outside Ava Island. So this is really the first wide-body that we've seen. The other two were narrow-body aircrafts that we've had, and in between we've had a few narrow-body Airbus aircrafts, in the late 80s and early 90s. It is shocking, and it's never seen. But I also wanted to point out, you spoke of the survivor being in 11A, and he was actually supposed to be in 11J, and a lady was supposed to be in 11A. The lady tweeted the picture of herself in 11J with the chief minister, ex-chief minister of Gujarat, and probably her last picture, and so obviously they'd interchanged seats. It's so eerie that this would happen. It's something that none of us could ever imagine would happen. It's a scary thought.
Yeah. I want to sort of go back to our guests. I believe Arunima will be patched through in just a minute as well. Mr. Sharma is still with us. So again, Mr. Sharma, taking the story forward, like obviously as Captain Thomas said, they'll have to recover the black box, the voice recording systems, etc., from the debris. Typically, how long do these investigations take? The only other instances we've seen in the case of a Boeing aircraft, at one point the 737 Maxes had to be grounded because of repeated crashes and so on and so forth. But with the 787, like I said, there's never been a crash ever in the 787. Typically, what would it take? A month, 3 months before we know what exactly happened on board AI 171?
The investigation which is done by AIB is a very, very thorough process. They look at each and every aspect. And for certain things, they would require reports. Equipment in some cases is sent for testing, and you get the reports from there. So the timeline, could be anything from, you could know with the FDR, you could know the most probable cause in the first 30 days itself, or it could take longer. But normally we see that these kind of investigations take, a couple of months before any kind of definitive answer can be given on what could be the cause. As the captain speaking earlier was saying, these pilots also very experienced people. The pilot in command had 8,000 hours, was an alumni from one of the best flying training schools in the country, Grua. He's an alumni from there, I believe. So, all these factors will be taken into account. All the data will be analyzed before any kind of a definitive answer would be given to the public on what exactly caused this unfortunate incident to happen.
All right, Mr. Sharma, Captain Thomas, Mr. Lazar, and of course, Mr. Padnikar, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you indeed, as we condole these deaths and join the families in this terrible, terrible hour of grief. Arunima, my colleague, has just landed at the Ahmedabad airport. She's now joining us live. Arunima, what are you seeing around you? Is the airport now back to fully functional? Have the number of flights, the traffic, has it been impacted in any significant way?
So that, yes, I've just landed. Telltale signs of the kind of chaos that Ahmedabad airport has seen over the last 6-7 hours is visible. We are in the arrival lounge, mostly empty. I think the first 2 flights have just landed here. But in the departure lounge, while we were coming in, we saw many passengers waiting there. There were huge queues. Many passengers were sitting on the floor. I think the airlines had provided them with food packets considering the delay. Many could not take off. Because the operationalization of the airport took time. Once the accident or the air crash was reported, I think for about 4 hours the airport was shut. So owing to the delay, there is now a backlog, and that's why in the departure hall there are kids, there are elderlies, and there are other normal-aged passengers, middle-aged passengers who are still waiting. I could also see a lot more CISF officials on duty here. Trying to ensure that the VIP movement that is happening, a number of VIPs have also landed. Home Minister Amit Shah is here. Also, Civil Aviation Minister has landed. So outside too, in fact, our vehicle is unable to get to the airport area because outside the airport and the crash site is not very far. There's a huge traffic jam outside of the airport as well, as we are told.
Did you get a chance to sort of speak to people there who've just landed? Obviously, everybody's heard about this news. This has been the only story since about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On the flight from Delhi to Ahmedabad too, this must have been the topic of conversation. What were people saying about this unfortunate tragedy?
So I was on a Boeing flight as well. Boeing flight is the one that has crashed. So there was a lot of sense of anxiety, especially when the security announcements were being made by the crew. It was routine announcement, but in terms of emergency, what is it that you should do? Everybody, this time around, most people around me were listening to the crew with a lot of attention. Nobody was looking at their mobile. Nobody was looking out of the window. They were paying attention, especially the part where they said, what should you do? And we are told at least one passenger managed to jump out of the emergency door and survive. So I think that security announcement helped. Second is when the flight landed here at Ahmedabad, we saw some people clapping. Most passengers here are people who belong to Ahmedabad or who speak Gujarati. So there were some Gujarati greetings that were exchanged. Some people clapped. Many called up their loved ones. And I can tell you, the crew members also, when I chit-chatted with them, they told me that for their family members, it has been a very, very anxious last 5-6 hours. They were still on duty. When we took off from Delhi, it was not clear whether the flight will land or not because the Ahmedabad airport was not operational. But finally, when the green signal was received, the crew and their family members too spent some anxious moments before they finally touched down in Ahmedabad safe.
All right, Arunama, we'll leave it at that. Before we go back to other guests who will be joining us in the latter part of this program, I also want to bring you up to speed with the timeline. First, show you that video. It's a matter of just 30 seconds after it is airborne, after it is nose up, as they say, once the flight is up in the air, once it's nose up. It's just a matter of 30 seconds. It just comes gliding down, almost like somebody dropped a giant rock from the skies. And then at 1:39, within a minute of takeoff, it crashes onto this hostel building. It's attached to a medical institution. There were undergraduate medical students who were there, who had gathered there for lunch. It was lunchtime at 1:39 in the afternoon this afternoon, and it crashes into this building. So there are fatalities, not just of the people who were on board, other than one person who miraculously managed to survive. There is also, I'm afraid, a large number of fatalities on the ground. About 30 bodies from the ground, people who were on the ground, have been shifted to the hospital as well. 30 people have been taken to hospital, some of them in grievous injury. It is really a matter of concern because investigators will be probing this for days, for months now, to find out what is it that led to such a crash, because it's so dramatic. It's not like this flight was mid-air for an hour or a couple of hours, or that it was something that happened at the time of landing. This is within a minute of takeoff for the captain to send a SOS message or a mayday call to the ATC. No communication then between the ATC and the captain of the flight. And despite the fact that, this is an aircraft which has a stellar record of safety. There's not been a single instance of an air crash involving a Dreamliner 787. This is the very first one. And if you look at that, once the flight takes off, within 30 seconds after its nose up, it just comes crashing down. One of the things that people have pointed to after looking at this footage 2 or 3 times is that the landing gear has not been drawn in. It is still out. I don't know. I'm not an expert, so I don't know if that is a particular cause of concern. Let's try and ask Captain Sam Thomas that. He's a former pilot and the president of the Airline Pilot Association of India. The fact that the landing gear has not gone in, Angad Singh is also joining us, aviation expert. Would you make much of that, Captain Thomas?
Oh, well, it appears that there is a startle effect on whatever has happened. And this is very common, that the moment you notice something that is not normal, your complete attention is shifted towards that. And that is the reason he might have not called for. Now, this is speculation, all speculation, I must put it up. There is a good reason that he would be attending to the engine emergency or any emergency that has come up and not elected to take the gear up. Now, if from what I can see, if he's having a loss of thrust on both engines, it would not be a wise thing to put up that landing gear up. Having said that, this is I'm looking at this video clip, which is limited information, and giving you my assessment on that.
Angad, the fact that, and I was speaking about this in the previous half hour of this conversation as well, some of the major accidents that we've had, air accidents here in India, usually involve planes going off the runway, skidding off the runway. The Kozhikode instance, the Mangalore instance, it was a tabletop runway. The plane literally fell off that tabletop runway. But this is the first instance I can think of where at the time of takeoff, and that too within a short span, within a minute of takeoff, there's a mayday call and the flight just comes crashing down. What do you think possibly went wrong?
I think it's clear that this aircraft lost thrust on both engines. Now, what specifically caused that is much more difficult to say. One point of speculation, for example, has been birds, not too dissimilar from the accident on the Hudson that we saw all those years ago. But normally when that happens, the engines will trail debris, smoke, and so on. And there's no real trail from these engines from what is admittedly a very grainy, low-resolution video. So it may not have been birds. And I think given the sort of expected actions of a pilot in such an emergency, it may well be that this engine emergency took place after decision speed, after what they call V1. where the aircraft and the aircrew are committed to taking off regardless of what goes wrong. And it may have been anything from a mechanical fault to bird ingestion.
But couldn't he have aborted the takeoff if he did? Because I mean, within a minute of takeoff or within 30 seconds of takeoff, the SOS call, the Mayday call was made, and the flight crashes. So what happened in those 30 seconds that he couldn't abort the takeoff?
As a general rule, once you cross decision speed, it's called decision speed because that is the point at which you decide whether you're committed to taking off or not. Once you're faster than that speed, you don't change your decision. And in this case, if they decided to take off, there was no chance that they were going to do anything differently. And frankly, at those speeds, if it had speed to rotate and get airborne, even if they had tried to set down again on the runway, what was left of the runway, I suspect, and again to echo Captain Thomas's remark, again, this is pure speculation, but losing both engines at this phase of flight, it ends badly almost no matter what you do, no matter what the pilots do. It's just incredibly unfortunate.
Captain Malik is also joining us. He's a charter airline pilot. Captain Malik, from whatever you've seen of this video footage, within a minute of takeoff, in fact, within about barely 35 seconds after its nose up, it comes crashing down. Both our previous speakers saying that clearly both the engines lost thrust. I mean, both the engines malfunctioned. Otherwise, he could have survived, at least landed it in a slightly safer place, maybe in an open field, even if one engine was working. But the fact that both engines failed at the same time, which is a 1 in a million chance of such a thing happening, what do you think led to that?
See, I very much agree with by both fellows. They said it right that it's incident had happened because of the engine lost the power. Because we can see at the time of the takeoff, the aircraft gained the right power till it's reached, I think, 200 or 300 feet height from the runway. And suddenly it's just sink towards of the incident place, and we can see it that it's something from the tail attack also, because this plane had took something on the left, from the left also. It was not on the straight gliding, descending path. So might be we can say this is the absolutely we can say this is the loss of both of engine lost the power, and it did happen. We can assume it right now, but the rest of things it will become after the investigation what exactly had happened with the aircraft and inside the cockpit.
All right, Mr. Mirza Faizan is also an aviation expert. He apparently worked on the design and development of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. The fact that this was an aircraft which had a stellar record, not a single known crash of the 787 Dreamliner until today, how does our understanding of what went wrong today change given these developments?
So, Zaka, yes, Boeing 787 is a stellar safety record. It's a pretty impressive bird. There's not one event which leads to an air crash. There's a series of events always which leads to a plane crash or a disaster of this scale. So there's a lot of things which we have, which is a subject of investigation. The fuel system, right? The maintenance of the fuel system. I mean, there could be a lot of reason why the engine lost power. There could be a bird strike. There could be foreign object intake and on its takeoff roll. There could be fuel malfunction in the fuel system. That could also be one of the problems. So once the investigation starts, the entire maintenance log since the day one this aircraft entered into service has to be properly investigated to find out.
What do you mean by malfunctioning of the fuel system? Why would that lead to a crash? If a layman is watching this program, and I'm sure a lot of them are, why would the malfunctioning of the fuel system, what's the connection between that and the engines losing power?
All right, so in this phase of the flight, when an aircraft is needing maximum thrust, maximum power from the engine, keep in mind that the aircraft is also gulping down maximum amount of fuel. So if the fuel system, which is pumping the fuel from the fuel tanks, which is probably in the engine and its belly, to the engine, if that malfunctions, there's a very high probability that the engine may burn out. Now, since both the engine burn out at the same time, which is a very remote possibility, right? There must be some integrated cause which impacted both the engines at the same time, right? So fuel system could be one of that.
What other cause could be there?
As I said, bird strike, which happened when Captain Selly landed his plane in the Hudson in 2009. I just seen for the first time, I've seen the video of this aircraft crashing from the time it took off on your channel.
Yeah, let's play that video again, yeah.
Yeah.
As you're speaking, yeah.
So I do not see that there is a possibility of a bird hit. Reason being, when the bird is sucked into the engine of an aircraft, the engine is deprived of right amount of oxygen, and it starts to sputter. It starts to give short blast, black smoke from its exhaust, which I cannot see in this situation. So bird hit is definitely not something I will speculate on at this point of time, right? Fuel system might look one. Sometime it might happen. Now this video is from a different angle. Sometime when the pitch is too much, the aircraft is deprived of fuel as well. But I do not see that the pitch is also very abnormal at this point of time. So the malfunction of the fuel system is one thing. I will put my
Captain Thomas was referring to this. I think in the 3 instances that you recounted where both engines malfunctioned at the same time, I think you said one of them, obviously the Sully example, was the bird hit, the famous one where he flew into the Hudson River. But the second example you cited, Captain Thomas, was of contaminated fuel system.
That's correct. That happened with British Airways, if I'm not mistaken. It was a 777 airplane, and there is a phenomenon called cold soaking that happens, and that somehow will affect the fuel system. And now again, the caveat at all times about the speculative part. Even I do not believe that this airplane has suffered a bird hit. Secondly, the engines of these airplanes are not the same as the one that Captain Sully faced during that the Hudson issue. And secondly, we've operated out of Ahmedabad several times, and the birds that come not during the migratory season but at the normal times like it is now are not sufficiently big enough to cause any major damage to a 787 engine, and let alone both of those engines. So
no, and also I would imagine it can't be just one bird. It has to be a flock of birds. And from whatever we've seen this visual, we've zoomed in and stuff, we can't see any flock of birds around the time of takeoff. Again, admittedly, this is CCTV footage. It's being recorded from somewhere inside the airport compound itself. It's a little grainy. It's not necessarily a high resolution image or high resolution video, but it doesn't seem like nowhere in this video can I see any kind of flock of birds.
And when you hit birds, there is a telltale sign from the engine if it has had this catastrophic kind of failure. And the fact that he has given a mayday call, there has been a significant failure. And there have been questions of why there was no communication after that. You must understand that this is VHF communication. Once the aircraft loses altitude, it would be difficult because it's a line of sight communication, and it would be difficult for the air traffic control to get in touch with the airplane or vice versa.
So Angad, if indeed there was some kind of fuel system issue, and this was the same flight which went from Delhi to Ahmedabad, and then the next leg of the flight was Ahmedabad-London, how come they didn't detect this, or these red flags were not raised in the previous leg of this flight?
I mean, again, with the caveat that this is entirely speculation, these issues, they don't manifest immediately. They don't manifest all of a sudden. They take time to show up. I mean, for example, if it's debris blocking a filter or damaging a fuel pump, it doesn't catastrophically seize right away. In fact, it could take precisely that amount of time, a Delhi to Ahmedabad flight, for the fuel system contamination to sort of take hold. And then I think one of my panelists already mentioned this. Takeoff is the regime in which the engines are sucking down the most amount of fuel. And so for that small issue in the fuel system, whether it's a filter or a pump or whatever, takeoff is actually the likeliest time that it would manifest itself. But again, I mean, at this point, it's losing the fuel system on two engines on a modern aircraft, which are designed to be redundant, is highly unusual. I have to admit, I'm not intimately familiar with the 787's fuel system, so I don't know if there are any single points of failure. But yeah, losing systems, safety critical systems, in today's age of certification would be very unusual.
And also, I would imagine, while this aircraft was being turned around after it landed, after it completed the first leg, and while it was being turned around, there would have been requisite maintenance, and the engineers would have checked it. Again, this was not picked up while it was on ground in Ahmedabad before it was turned around for the London leg?
Unless a specific issue is reported, turnaround servicing, turnaround maintenance is not that intensive. I mean, it's not. You wouldn't go into the fuel system, for example, on a turnaround. Unless the pilots, unless the aircrew on the incoming flight specifically flagged an issue for maintenance, I don't think the fuel system would be looked at to that extent.
If Mr. Faizan is there, and I can go back to him, all right, we'll go back to him in a moment. Captain Malik, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, if this was not a bird hit, and again, I'm just from whatever I can see on the footage, I'm not an expert. I don't visibly see any flock of birds, when this flight is taking off. If it's a fuel system issue, again, the question that is top of mind is how come the previous leg of this flight did not detect that? Again, how come the ground engineers who would have serviced this and maintained this to turn it around for the next leg, and it's a long leg. I mean, surely there would have been some degree of refueling there as well, because you would need much more fuel for an 8-hour, 9-hour flight to London as opposed to a 2-hour flight between Delhi and Ahmedabad. How come no one picked this issue? Because it's happened within seconds of takeoff. So the issue, whatever it may have been, did not develop in that 30 seconds while it was on the runway and taking off.
Yeah. See, I'm not agree with Mr. Faizan's what he question he raised about the fuel system, because the aircraft is not. It was its first flight from the Ahmedabad. It came from Delhi to Ahmedabad. It had happened, and it somewhere is the problem with the fuel system. It may be happen in the way from Delhi to Ahmedabad. It could maybe happen in the mid-air also. And I'm telling you very clearly that the fuel system of the 787, it's a four calibration fuel supplying system inside this aircraft, which is one is not working, then other is automatically start working. So it is not, this possibility is not possible that there is a fault with the fuel system. First of all, clear. Secondly, my fellow is he's right that there is no but we could not see in the video also that it's not a migratory system also. Even it's in very low flying right now. If it is on the 1,000 feet or maybe 800 feet or 700 feet, then we can say some bird may be hit to this engine. But in the very early after the takeoff of the aircraft, suddenly aircraft lose the power. So we can say somewhere in the local weather around the runway might suddenly sudden change in the weather, and the losing of this both of engine, it might have happened in my observation.
Mr. Faizan, I'll give you the last word, a minute. Again, the hypothesis that you put forth, again, all of us are speculating here, right. But the idea that it would have been some kind of fuel contamination, a fuel system contamination, how come it didn't get picked up in the previous leg of the flight from Delhi to Ahmedabad?
So it does not work like that. If there is an issue in a system, it could have been picked up in the previous flight, and going with that hypothesis, every plane has to crash if there's an issue in its first flight, right? It does not work like that. How it works is like every flight, every takeoff, every landing add to stress. And then that stress on the system accumulates and it results in a chain reaction, which keeps on impacting some other systems. This leads to crash. There have been instances where maintenance done 6 years ago led to a plane crash after 6 years, right? So there are incidents like that. But I agree with all of you here that we are all speculating. We don't know what has happened.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Like I said, our thoughts and prayers with the families of the victims who died. There's been just one miraculous survivor that we know of. All the others on board are feared dead. Thank you very much for tuning into this coverage. But on the other side, my colleague Rahul will take this forward.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
I can assure you that Indian aviation is probably one of the safest in the world. We have all the protocols in place. Our DGCA is very robust and effective. And to find, to pick holes into our ability to manage Indian aviation would be very unfair. And I always say this, and I repeat, that aviation is either 100% or zero. There's nothing like 99.9% in aviation. And therefore, in this case also, look at the aircraft. It arrived from Ahmedabad from Delhi. Obviously, it flew without any issue. And to take a 9.5-hour journey from Ahmedabad to London, obviously the pilots would have done all the pre-flight checks. And no pilot is foolish enough to take off if he is not satisfied. The captain per se in this aircraft would have also had thousands and thousands of hours of command. And a 787 and today's aircraft per se are very robust, fail-safe. They have many backup systems. And to really think what went wrong, I would be hazarding a guess, which would not be fair. But the point here is the aircraft did go on a takeoff roll. And between the time the wheels went up and the time it crashed, probably the time frame would have been almost only about 60 seconds or so, because you can't go to 800 feet and crash and it be within the time span is only 60 seconds. Now, he's already given a mayday call. Now, I don't know what exactly went wrong. It will be, again, hazarding a guess, which would be unfair. The only thing which can be ascertained is now, since the aircraft has fallen just a few hundred meters from the airport and in the BJ Medical Complex, therefore, to retrieve the black box and the other equipment would be also, quite simple. We would be able to ascertain only after that. Let me tell you one more thing. In today's aircraft, they are very sophisticated. All the, parameters of an aircraft, right? Every single second the aircraft is in the air, all the parameters are recorded, not only by the aircraft, but they're also transmitted to a central command, real time, of the airline itself. So if there is, when an aircraft does a flight, there is a way to ascertain every single parameter during whatever the duration of the flight. So if anything would have gone wrong prior to this flight, or which may have escaped the attention of anybody, I'm sure this will be retrieved in no time once the equipment is found.
Now, Mr. Patel, just to go back in time, because this fleet, the Dreamliner, very, very safe. I think from what the experts are saying, and I only have them to sort of lean on for facts, they've said that this is the first time a Dreamliner has actually crashed anywhere in the world. Now, most of these Dreamliners were purchased, I suppose, about 10, 12, 15 years back by Air India when it was still government-owned. Obviously, there would have been a huge procedure that must have unfurled within government to select the plane. There would have been due diligence. There would have been all sorts of studies that would have been conducted.
Well, most certainly. I mean, first, the procedure itself in government is a very robust procedure. Goes through several layers. And ultimately, the basic selection of aircraft is done only on technical parameters. Because, the airline, requires a certain type of aircraft for certain, lengths of the flights. You want to go to the US, you want to go to the European countries, or to, 8-hour flights, 12-hour flights, and so on. And the kind of configuration you want. Let me also tell you that the Dreamliner, at the time it was ordered, was one of the most sophisticated, advanced fly-by-wire aircraft which was going to be produced. And it was ordered by...
Viewers, the footage makes the heart sink. In 30 seconds, it was all over. You can see those pictures, all over for 242 passengers on AI-171, barring one miracle survivor, as the plane crashed into a medical college located in its flight path just beyond the perimeter of the Ahmedabad airport, viewers. One of the biggest tragedies in the country. The plane lost lift catastrophically. Its landing gear hadn't even been retracted, and you can see that, viewers. It was laden with fuel as it was preparing for a long haul to London Gatwick.